So let me introduce who our moderator is going to be. It is Dr. Lisa Kimball. She is here at VTS, our Associate Dean of Lifelong Learning. She's also the director of the Center of the Ministry of Teaching, and she's a professor of Christian formation and congregational leadership. And she also likes long walks on the beach. So let me bring Dr. Kimball up here, who will be our moderator and will be handling our panelists.
Woohoo! So I think the best thing is for the panelists to come sit down, join us on the panel. We've been commenting that for those of us here in this space, using all of this microphone technology is making the sound a little bit artificial. The reason we're doing it, though, is that we're really excited to have some folks live streaming with us, as well as the recording that this allows. So if you're having trouble hearing, we recognize that the acoustics in this space are awkward. Don't be shy about moving around until you find a spot that really works for you. So please do move forward, move sideways. And I also want to just comment, there are two other planners that were instrumental in this day, one of whom we hope is live streaming, and that is the Reverend Jimmy Hartley, who is in the Diocese of Upper South Carolina, and is responsibly, with his spouse, Caroline, awaiting the birth of their third child. So Jimmy, thank you for all the work you did on this. We're really grateful, and you are very present today with us. And then the fourth is the Reverend Daniel Hartley, who we hope is not live streaming, because his excuse for not being here was to attend his diocesan convention as a newly ordained leader in the church, and so he's in the Diocese of Southwest Florida. So Daniel, we hope you're not actively watching, but we will look forward to you telling us everything you think about this after the fact, and we're grateful that he too was part of this planning. So welcome anybody online, and welcome back to all of you from your snack break. I think the best way for people to be introduced is to introduce themselves. I could read bios and tell you what I know about them intellectually or what I know about them personally, but each of our panelists comes with a particular perspective on music in worship, and he or she will share a little bit about who they are and how they got here. Ellen, why don't you begin?
Me. Okay, I'm Ellen Johnston. I am the director of the Center for Liturgy and Music here at VTS. I've been a parish musician for 30 years. I think I started when I was 7, and mostly in the small and medium-sized parish. I serve right now at the Church of the Holy Comforter in Richmond, where I live, and it is a church that I think has a broad expression of liturgy and music. We have organ music. I have a very wonderful choir, but we also, last Sunday for communion, we have a congregant who plays the hammered dulcimer, and I have a person in my choir who played the fiddle, and we did an arrangement of Pleading Savior, one of those wonderful old Southern harmony tunes. And so we are able to engage the talents in our congregation to do different things, of not just organ and choir or piano, and it's a congregation who loves all of that. And I guess that's all I need to say right now.
For those of us who are Episcopalian and maybe Episcopal Church polity geeks, I also want to point out that Ellen currently serves on the Standing Committee on Liturgy and Music for the Episcopal Church. So one of the other benefits of her being in this space is as a listener and a translator on our behalf as part of Missional Voices to the hard work, the incredible work that women and men across our church are doing to align our practices with our actual denominational identity, particularly in the form of our Book of Common Prayer and the other approved supplemental resources. So thank you for carrying that message.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Akila O'Grady. I have had a very long journey in the church space, I should say. I was actually raised in a Presbyterian church here based out of Maryland. And so I have actually spent a large portion of my church life in a very strict, rigid, I should say, upbringing, where I spent a lot of time in a very strict choir sense, and then shifted completely to the Episcopal world, where I actually lead worship in a rock band. So it's a completely different lifestyle where I was raised, where you couldn't even clap, so to speak.
Rarely hear the Episcopal Church being the magnet for rock bands. Like, this, cheer, you guys, this is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, so my world was spent in handbells and orchestra and choir, and somebody would sing a piece for the offertory, and it would be amazing, and you couldn't clap, and I would be moved to want to do something, and it would just drive me nuts because I would want to, I'd go like this, but you couldn't. And I always came from a space where I felt like I could go to any church, but if the music was not moving, that's how I felt my worship was. I always identified with the music, and if the music wasn't there, it was very difficult for me. And so I was called to St. Matt's Episcopal Church a few years back to lead worship there, and it is an awesome church for me. They push the envelope on many levels, which we will get into later, but it is a full-on rock band, and it is amazing, and they do amazing things, and there's clapping, and there's lots of worship, and it's awesome, and we have saxophone, and we have drums, and we have bass, and they get loud, and we have fun, and it's great, and we clap, and it's awesome. So, and that's me.
Do you clap?
I clap, and we have tambourine, and it's great. Oh, I'm sorry, St. Matt's Episcopal Church.
In Sterling,
Virginia, here locally. Yeah.
Rick Bauer.
Hi, my name is Rick Bauer, and I'm actually a student in the incredible MDiv program here at VTS. It's so glad to be here. I have previous graduate experience in a master's program in religious studies down at a secular university in Florida, and I taught religion courses for 5 years in my early mid-20s. But I left academia because I had a really neat opportunity to embark on a full-time music career that I did successfully for 20 years. I toured internationally as a singer and a guitarist. I produced a number of albums, and I actually recorded and released 5 albums of my own. I came to the Episcopal Church in kind of a unique way, though. I was actually called upon by a popular rector in South Florida to develop and to perform a contemporary music program in a parish that was suffering by virtue of its inability to communicate with people in a vernacular that spoke to them. So I didn't come in with the audacity to bring my rock band, which I would have loved to have done. But what I did do is I spent some time, as our great Dr. Gortner will tell us, gathering information and trying to pay attention to what the cultural ethos of this congregation was. And after some study, I found that, I could bring in a drum machine with some percussion and a bass player and play the acoustic guitar and try to find what I like to identify as a third rail for their worship. Meaning, there is an enlivened way, a percussive way, to pull off just about anything in our 1982 hymnal. But there are also people who love it if they can hear a Beatles song in the context of worship. There are also folks that listen to contemporary Christian music and feel that somehow their idea of culture and identity is lifted up if they hear "Open the Eyes of My Heart." Mm-hmm. So, without putting too much of what my personal music preferences were into that situation, I did my best to cover as many bases as I could. So that's how I actually became an Episcopalian, and some 5 years later, I'm blessed to be here on the ordination track among these wonderful people at VTS.
Thank you all. It's encouraging to hear this intersection in the 3 narratives that we've already heard a little from, of evangelism, mission, and vocation. And I think that's a space that this conference truly honors. So let's keep that up as we talk to each other over meals today and so forth. We have about half an hour to engage the panelists' experience with what April shared, and also to engage you in questions. I tried to listen to some of the questions that were asked earlier, and if they are not repeated by you, I'll try to draw them back into our conversation. I think to begin, I would like to, I sort of was going all over the place, and in many ways you just responded so well, but I think I would like to kind of get to the nitty-gritty. If any of you have a short story you could share about sort of the music wars that you have experienced that were truly constructive. I think you got very close to that, Akila, with your story about the rock band. But I would love to hear the actual narrative, if it's possible, of a music war that did not leave losers in the trenches. Something that helped actually build the identity of the community, the assembly, the congregation, in such a way that you feel there was spiritual formation, as April pointed out, that might have actually occurred for all people. Does anyone have a story about that?
A music war, okay. Within our congregation?
Could be. A concrete experience is valuable for us, I think.
Okay, so I think one of the things that St. Matt's is known for doing with our music is that we push the envelope a little bit, or I should say a lot. And we really like to reach out to our community through a multitude of areas, and specifically within our musical outreach, we take it to a whole different level, not just within the contemporary Christian music world, but we actually touch on different areas with themes Sundays. For example, Beatles Sunday. David Bowie passed away, the late David Bowie, so we did a David Bowie Sunday. Our pastor called and said, "I love him, make it work." So we have rehearsal Tuesday evenings, and I got a call Tuesday afternoon and said, "Here are 5 songs I need you to know by 7 p.m. I know one David Bowie song.
Ground control to Major Tom.
And I said, okay. But even within our own group, we have a little bit of a dynamic of certain singers that have their own internal struggles that just bowed out that week and said, "I'm sorry, I come to church to worship and not to sing David Bowie." We even had a funk Sunday and said, "I come to church to sing and worship and not to sing funk music." And so while we're trying to do things such as sing things that you might hear on the radio and bridge that gap between Christian music and hearing the message of God through a David Bowie song or a Commodore song or a Beatles song or Matthew West or Hillary Scott or, Plum or, I'm throwing out, contemporary Christian bands. There is our own internal music war, even within our own worship band, where our job is to outreach to the congregation. So if we have our own music war within our own band, right, we're worship leaders, then we have to bridge the gap with the congregation. And so that can create a little bit of tension as well, right? And so sometimes you just have to step back and decide, what is my role? And so sometimes we just decide, I'm not going to sing. And that might be a challenge as well, because I've been called to sing and lead worship, and so you have to prayerfully think about, okay, God, what are you asking me to do? And sometimes you take a step back and you just don't sing. And then that kind of also bridges the gap of, am I performing because I'm not singing Christian music, or am I actually delivering the message? So sometimes I actually have a challenge myself, because I say, okay, Father Rob, I'll do Beatles music, and it's up to you to figure out how you're going to deliver the message. I don't know David Bowie music, and actually it just works. One of the phrases that I love to say is, however the Spirit moves you, and I'll sing it, and it always works miraculously. But it's not miraculously, God is always there, right? So that's
helpful.
Yeah.
So we could talk about just this one piece for a long time, but what I hear inside of that are a number of practices as musicians, vocalists, band in this particular congregation that I would put into a domain of Christian practice, such as the practice of humility, practices of discernment, the technical practice of good communication among the musicians, that there are, whether you've articulated it intentionally or not, and I'm afraid we don't have time to go there right now, but this group has found its way to a set of behaviors that allow them, from my perspective, to lead worship in a responsive and responsible way, because each of you comes to this as an adult working out your own faith life in a mature and responsible way. I think that's very important. The issue that April raised about performance and the tension between how much are we compromising, how much are we selling out, as it were, to accommodate. If this level of Christian practice is exercised by any of us in leadership, it seems to me that God works in the midst of that and allows an authenticity to be presented.
Yeah.
So thank you very, very much. Ellen, it looks like you're ready to offer.
Yeah, I will. I couldn't, when you first asked the question, I thought, I don't know. My war was with myself. When I first worked for a church as an adult, because I had served as at a church when I was a junior in high school, but as an adult, I was at a parish in Jackson, Mississippi. And when I was interviewed by the senior warden and the rector, they told me, and this will tell you how old I am probably, we are a renewal parish. And those of you who were around back in the 70s and 80s might remember renewal music. Hymns for, songs for celebration. There was a little red book that came out. I had no clue what that meant when they told me they were a renewal parish, and I thought maybe their faith was all renewed or something, but I just sort of said, okay, not having a clue. Well, I started looking at what was in the pews and saw this little red book, and I thought, this is campfire music. You know, it had that, I called it the 100-fold Alleluia that sang Alleluia 100 times, and then it said, He is Lord, another 100 times, if those of you who remember this little book. And I was very resentful of having to do this music. And really did it with not a real minister. I did it because I was told to do it, and I did it very grudgingly, and probably not very well, to think about it. Shortly after that, I read an essay by Carol Doran about popular religious song, which is what this was. It was popular religious song. And I read it, and it was published in the Hymnal Companion, but I'd read it before that, and sort of had an awakening at that point that I was not called to just do music that I liked. And that it did not compromise my integrity as a classically trained musician to sing some of the music in that book. And remembering what Alec Whiten said, that a church musician is first a pastor, and second a teacher, and last a performer, that my pastoral role was primary in my job as a church musician, and that while I can sing Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven, with the organ cranked up as loud as it would go, and that's my Take Me Jesus moment. That's what does it for me. But I also realized that for my congregation then, as is now, that might leave them cold. That isn't where they're going to hook into the liturgy, and where they could sing something in Hymns 4 or something in a multitude of resources. That's where they can hook into the liturgy. So that my job as a worship leader is to offer a place during the liturgy where folks can find their spot, find their Take Me Jesus moment. And while what theirs is might not be mine, I need to find the way to provide that for them and offer it to them, and do it in the best way with my choir or as however I play for them.
Thank you. Rick, unless you want to particularly respond to that, I would love to turn the question towards one of the questions invited from the audience, and I'll get to you, Sean, in just one second. The issue of perfectionism, how that can be a barrier in our engagement with worship, and particularly music. I just wonder your observations as someone who's crossed a number of worlds of church and music. Help us out of that dilemma, that sort of false polarity, but we get paralyzed there as Anglicans. Can you say a little about that?
Well, first, I really appreciate you lifting that up because part of what's ironic in that question is that when I landed here at VTS, I felt silenced to a certain degree. It wasn't until I had, like the blessing of really speaking with our great Dr. Bill Roberts, who runs our music program here, about how open this tradition really is musically and theologically, that I was able to, forge a little bit more space in this community. Because, I think a good starting point here is even if we look at the language for how we discuss about this, worship, wars, pandering, in election season, I'm almost drawn into the fact that, man, this kind of sounds like political rhetoric. I mean, this is very fear-based speak. And one of the conversations that Dr. Roberts and I continue to have is that we recognize as church musicians, whether we're classically trained, whether we're more of a vernacular approach to music, that people forge space in our churches. Whether it's the person behind the organ, whether it's the person in the altar guild, whether it's that wonderful outgoing personality that loves to greet people. Approaching this pastorally, I think really means that we do withhold our personal opinion about things to a large extent, to try to just see our music as a relationship in a context that gives meaning for a particular set of people in a particular place. Now, in Northern Virginia, that means something different than it does in Miami. It means something different at VTS than it does for your parish in Maryland, I would love to do an hour of Bowie songs here, but I don't think it would go over, But that being said, if we can learn to quiet our own voices as even leaders or as musicians enough to identify the context that we've been brought by the Holy Spirit into, then there's a lot that we really can do. And we can diffuse this language. We can diffuse this tension and really demonstrate that it is, in fact, a just false paradigm.
There's another theme flowing here about the embodiment, the incarnation lived in our vocations as leaders, musicians. All of you are speaking to this sense of showing up, being fully present, and trusting that God is going to guide us into the work that we do together. But the gifts you've been given are actually essential. Being silenced on the side was not the fullness of Rick Bauer engaged in theological education at this moment in time in this seminary. So finding your way to be more fully present while being deeply respectful of the context and the traditions that are in place here. That tension, that paradox is vital. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
There was a question.
A question for Ellen, actually. Ellen, thank you very much for sharing that personal story, and I wanted to follow up on it. In conferences like this one that I've been to before, that oftentimes have a lot of clergy that are in them, a lot of really great ideas get generated from that, a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about the different vernaculars for music. And then we go back to the parish and meet our classically trained American Guild of Organist member, music director, who cares deeply about music, but often has some of the same types of viewpoints that you just expressed that you'd had earlier in your career, and feels an affront to the kind of suggestions that might be offered. And I know you've done work, you and Bill both have done work in clergy-musician relationships, and I wondered if you could comment a little bit on some practical things about how to negotiate that transition from these ideas we might have and how to bring that to someone for whom you're almost speaking Martian.
Well, you've got hooked into one of my favorite topics of clergy-musician relationships, and I'll do a brief plug for a DVD that Bill Roberts and Ann Gillespie and I produced 4 or 5 years ago on this topic, and those are available. I believe that communicating a good personal relationship between clergy and musicians is key here, and building some trust that you as clergy are not just trying to force something and for no reason. So having a good relationship between the two of you, or the other, whatever clergy are there, so that there is trust built up. If there's no trust, then nothing's going to happen. And to be able to communicate clearly why you think something is important and why it's a good idea to do whatever you're trying to do, whether you're trying to convince the musician to sing, bring a guitar in or bring a djembe in, or whatever you're trying to do. There's got to be some trust. We tell a story on our DVD, and this actually happened to me at a parish. The clergy came to me during one of those interminable seasons after the Epiphany and said he wanted us to sing Shine, Jesus, Shine every Sunday as the song of praise. I was horrified, absolutely horrified, because the parish didn't know it, for one thing. And we did it. We sang it, and the congregation, and because I do think I'm going to do it as well as I can do it, even though I was pretty horrified by singing it for 8 Sundays in a row. But he never told me, he never articulated to me why he thought this was something that was worthy of doing. And I probably didn't articulate very well why I thought it was not a good, a good thing to do. Mainly because the congregation, it wasn't something they knew. They could maybe sing the chorus, but having that communication and being able to articulate what you want, what your vision is for music and liturgy in whatever context you're in, and for both of you to be able to do that.
Thank you so much. There was a thought that you triggered that April, I'll come back to it because it just went out of my mind. Diana, I think you have a question.
So my question goes back to some of what April was talking about, and is really for any of you or even to Lisa. Thinking about the relationship of theology to emotion and the connection of emotion to the power of symbol, how do you see that relating to embodied liturgy, the way in which we feel liturgy in our bodies, and the way that's grounded through music to a deeper understanding of the sacramental presence of what we're doing and in what we're doing and of symbol? Does that, I see Rick nodding.
Are you in a sense made a statement
I'm making
about
a statement.
no, which is a good statement. Are you asking for examples?
I'm asking for, does this resonate with you, and do you
Yeah.
have something to say about it? Because I've thought about it a lot, but I'd like to hear what other people think about it.
Good.
I think that this is kind of at the crux of it, because this is such an emotionally loaded thing. I mean, music is sacred to people, I mean, most of us have in one way or another even been invited into our own sense of faith by virtue of some amalgamation of sounds. Now, that might be a beautiful choir. It might be a Gregorian chant. It might be just a kickin' rock tune that just grooved us somewhere inside and said, man, this feels holy, But I think that the danger with this is that because it is so emotional, it's very easy for us, it's very easy for me to say, man, I feel so strongly about this. I mean, come on, man, why are we just sitting here? Whoa, I mean, I want to feel this. I want it to move, But if I have that attitude, if I project that attitude, that can be really destructive to someone else's sacred space, someone else's core of faith, And that's where, I mean, I'm the type of person that has a hard time learning how to go with the flow. You know, it's been one of the great gifts of where, you know, formation takes us here at VTS, is that we learn how to do that better, I think. And with music, this is incredibly important to be able to do. We have to be in the flow, you know, because if we feel that our classical training is undermined, as I think most classically trained people do when we play Shine, Jesus, Shine, you know. But if it's communicating to people, you know, if it's bringing them into the holy, there's real utility to that. But the opposite can be true too. If it's forced down our throat because we're told at a conference that we should be trying creative things and people can't stand it, that's something we need to be cognizant of too, you know?
So I think if you have a healthy balance though,
oh, no doubt.
Right? So I think at the end of the day though, you have to be aware as a leader how your audience is also responding. And it is very emotional. One of my favorite quotes though also is, when you are happy, you can enjoy the music, and when you're sad, you understand the lyrics, right? So it is very emotional.
Can you say that again more slowly so people hear it?
I know I speak very fast. When you're happy, you enjoy the music. When you're sad, you understand the lyrics. For me as a musician, emotionally, I sometimes have a very difficult time sometimes just even getting through songs, you know, and I'm sure you can identify with this. Like, I'll be up singing a song and I'll just start crying, and you know, I just have to leave it to some of my other musicians or some of my other, I'll call them colleagues or, you know, vocalists that'll just have to take over for me, or I'll just turn around, you know, let it out and come back to it. But if you have a healthy balance as a worship leader, you can see where you have a holy that can tap into those of us who really like something that's a little bit more subdued. And then you have a rock song that can, you know, lead us out. And so you have a balance of a congregation that, you know, because we have some people that are cradle Catholics that have come to our 9:30 service, right? So we have a blend. We've got some people that are coming as cradle Catholics that are like checking it out. Oh, what's going on? We've heard about this 9:30 service. They're pushing the envelope a little bit. We're not sure about it, but our kids really love it. And so our kids love going to service, and we can't fight that battle. Our kids love going to church, so they're pushing us to go out the door, so we're going to go to church. And if that means that we have to fight this battle of rock music, even though we're used to hearing very reserved hymns, then we're going to kind of deal with it, right? So it's like you've got that internal struggle of parents who are used to having a really relaxed service, but the kids who enjoy it. So you have to have a nice, healthy blend. So if you are kind of in tune to what your congregation likes and you kind of find that healthy balance, then I think it's okay. But it is an emotional struggle. But you have to just kind of see and be in tune. I think that's our job as worship leaders, to be able to recognize what's going on in your own congregation, right? And I think that's what works for us, because we do have that blend of you know, the rock stuff and the chill stuff and the contemporary stuff, and then we do have some of the more reserved stuff.
And I think Diana brought up the question of sacramental, and the thought that I'd had in that blending, when April used the language, music opens the space for us to be together, us being the assembly, the congregation. I wrote down, and how different is that from eating a meal together? So the music and the meal,
right,
are part of the blend, I think, that make the union sacramental, if that makes sense. So I'm going to actually move on because of time. I want to be sure April gets a few minutes to wrap this up with any comment she wants to make. The one concrete question I want to ask the three of you is another area of tension that I think you may have just brief insight on. Paper, projection, paperless. They're not mutually exclusive, but I think that is often where the rhetoric and the struggle of music in congregational worship shows up. The book, the bulletin, or the up, or both, or paperless. Any comments?
I think for us it doesn't matter. People don't sing anyway.
Say that again?
People don't sing anyway, so it doesn't matter.
So your question is, how do we engage people in actually using their voices, their instruments to sing? Okay.
Right. I think in our space, it's getting people to enjoy. I mean, I think for us, they're enjoying what's going on, but they're still standing there. They're enjoying it, but they're standing there and looking at us. So we have stuff that's up on our projector screen, but then at the end of the day, technology is just that. Technology is good when it works, but technology is annoying when it doesn't. So if the stuff goes down, they don't see it, so then it's nice to have paper as the backup. But at the end of the day, they have songs that they recognize and they sing it with us, and they don't, they have stuff that they have memorized. So
what's so amazing about that is you identify something where we have the opposite issue in an environment like this, where people have such a sense of ownership in the music, and when they're reading out of the hymnal, they know word by word, note by note, value by value, what each thing is. So the funny thing is that if you do something that's a little more contemporary, or you just have a sheet with lyrics, or you're throwing something on on the wall, people are like, well, how do I do this properly? The perfectionism thing, this isn't correct, So it again begs the relationship of our congregational contexts.
Well, we went to technology, and it was a big shift, just in all areas. So not just from a musical perspective, but just technology with the prayers and everything, announcements, and that was a big shift for people. And it was one of those things where it was a change management, just a change management.
And how we help people make that shift. Ellen, I see you leaning forward.
Yeah, my congregation where I work now, they sing really well, and it's all either in front of them by a book or by a service leaflet. And I think context is everything. Architecture always wins. It doesn't matter what you do, architecture wins. So if your parish if there's a place for a screen, and that's something that works in your context. In mine, paperless music, I love paperless music. It's harder to do where I am. I'll have to go down from the chancel to the into the congregation. It's harder to do it where I am. I can do it. It's easier in this space to do it because you're closer to the singers. But I do think for us, participation is everything, and they do it better with a hymnal or a service leaflet if something's printed in there.
Thank you. Can we just thank our panelists? April, did you hear anything that you want to shed light on or respond to for just a couple minutes?
I love that you end with the technology question because that's one of these areas of negotiation that's wrapped up in musical being in congregations. This question of how do we relate to the quote-unquote modern world. That's one of the kind of like the underlying questions that comes out when we're talking about how do we do music. What are we going to accept? What are we going to reject? It's kind of a classic religious question. What congregations, what religions do? And I love that you all had 3 different answers based on your context. And it reminded me and made me think, Ellen, of what you shared about your process in your parish and how important it is to share experiences with one another in the congregation. And your example of Shine, Jesus, Shine. I couldn't pick a more perfect example. It's an opportunity, right? It was an opportunity for your rector to explain, this is my goal, this is why this song is really important to me, this is what it makes me, but then I want to push more, this is what it makes me feel. These are the connotations I have with the song. This is what I experience when I'm singing the song. This is the best time I've ever heard it. And then for you to also explain from your perspective, this is what I feel when I hear this song. This is what it makes me think. This is what it makes me feel we're saying about God. And to do all of that. 2 of the parishes I worked with the closest here in Washington, Diocese of Washington, they hosted these kinds of conversations really just like, I don't know what they call them, we just call them musical conversations, where people got together and shared their experience of music in the church. And things came up, some people came in completely unaware that other people felt kind of outliered or excluded in worship because of the hymns that were being sung. They couldn't hear themselves. Depending on where people sit, because people have their own little turf in the sanctuary, they could hear other people or not hear other people. Some people found the hymns very difficult to sing. That was complete news to the other half of the congregation. And because these people have good relationships with each other already, these happen to be very healthy parishes, they happen to really like each other and care about each other to begin with. When they heard, like, oh, really? Those hymns make you feel like we don't care about you? Well, that's not how I want you to feel. There was this kind of group think happen. Well, how can we fix this? And that's where kind of a musical imagination was developed. It was in relationship. It was in congregational life, in hearing each other's experiences, and both present and past. This is what the music means to me. This is how I experience it now. I mean, it's an opportunity for empathy. So that's kind of the main thought I have hearing all of this, but I don't know if we've...
That's terrific.
Okay.
So I think we're going to break for worship now, but what I want to encourage is all four of these people will be at brunch. Sit with them. Bring your questions to them. Challenge them. This is a day for engagement. The intention here is not a one-size-fits-all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So we want to hear the sizes. Share your stories. Thank you.
Thank you.